On Father's Day, my daughter gave her stepfather a watch and said, "You've always been more of a dad than he ever was." I didn't say a word. Just canceled the $2,400 monthly tuition I'd been quietly covering. This morning, she called me in a panic. "Dad, the university says I'm dropped." "What did you do?" I, 47M, never thought Father's Day would become the day everything changed between my daughter and me. But sometimes life has a way of showing you exactly where you stand when you least expect it. The divorce happened 3 years ago. My ex-wife moved on quickly with her new husband, and I tried to be understanding. I wanted my daughter to have stability, even if it wasn't with me. What I didn't expect was to become the invisible parent while still being expected to foot every bill. I had been covering my daughter's private university tuition for 2 years without her mother or stepfather knowing. $2,400 every month, quietly transferred from my account to the university's billing department. I never mentioned it to anyone. My daughter assumed her mother and stepfather were handling it, and they apparently thought she had scholarships covering everything. I let them think whatever they wanted. My priority was making sure she could focus on her studies without financial stress. The arrangement worked fine until this past Father's Day. I had planned a small celebration, nothing fancy. Just dinner at her favorite restaurant, and maybe catching up on how her summer classes were going. She had been distant lately, but I figured it was normal college-age independence. When I arrived at my ex-wife's house to pick her up, I found the whole family gathered in the backyard. My daughter was presenting gifts, and I watched from the sliding door as she handed her stepfather an expensive-looking watch. The words that followed hit me like a physical blow. She told him he had always been more of a dad than I ever was. She thanked him for being there for every important moment, for caring about her future, for making sacrifices. The whole family beamed while she spoke about how grateful she was to have a real father figure in her life. I stood there for a full minute, processing what I had just witnessed. My ex-wife noticed me through the glass and waved, completely oblivious to what had just transpired. When my daughter finally came to the door, she seemed almost annoyed that I was there. She told me she had decided to spend Father's Day with her real dad and suggested we reschedule our dinner for another time. I drove home in complete silence. No anger, no dramatic confrontation. Just a cold, clear understanding of exactly how my role had been redefined. I was the ATM, not the father. That evening, I logged into my banking portal and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to the university. I also sent a brief email to the bursar's office explaining that I would no longer be covering the tuition payments. I didn't mention it to anyone. If my daughter wanted to spend Father's Day celebrating someone else as her real dad, then perhaps her real dad could handle the real responsibilities too. Summer passed quietly. I assumed the tuition issue would surface when the fall semester started, but I heard nothing. My daughter's communication had dropped to practically zero anyway. Occasional texts about needing money for textbooks or living expenses, which I handled as I always had. The tuition situation never came up in any of our brief conversations. I wondered sometimes if they had figured out alternative funding or if she had managed to secure financial aid. Part of me was curious about how long it would take for anyone to notice, but I didn't reach out to ask. If I wasn't significant enough to acknowledge on Father's Day, then I certainly wasn't going to insert myself into their financial planning. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late August, just 2 weeks before classes were scheduled to begin. My phone rang at 7 in the morning, and I could hear the panic in my daughter's voice before she even finished her greeting. She told me the university had just called her. Her registration had been dropped. They said there was an outstanding balance that hadn't been paid, and without immediate payment, she wouldn't be able to attend classes. She was confused and scared, asking me what could have happened and what she should do. I let her finish explaining the situation before I responded. I told her I had stopped paying her tuition 3 months ago, the day after Father's Day. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. She asked me why I would do something like that without warning her. I reminded her of what she had said to her stepfather about him being more of a real father than I had ever been. I explained that I had simply decided she was right, and that her real dad should probably handle the real responsibilities. The conversation that followed was unlike anything we had ever had. She tried to explain that she hadn't meant those words the way they sounded. She said she was just trying to make her stepfather feel appreciated and hadn't thought about how it would affect me. She insisted that she still loved me and considered me her father. I told her I understood she was trying to be kind to her stepfather, but that her words had consequences. I had been quietly covering her education costs for 2 years while watching myself become increasingly irrelevant in her life. The Father's Day incident had simply clarified the situation for me. She asked if I was really going to let her education suffer because of something she said in a moment of poor judgment. I pointed out that she had an entire family celebrating her stepfather as her real dad, and surely her real dad would want to ensure her education continued uninterrupted. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable as she realized I wasn't going to immediately fix the situation. She asked how much money was involved, and when I told her about the $2,400 monthly payments, she went completely quiet again. She told me she had no idea I was covering that expense. She thought her mother and stepfather were handling tuition while I covered her other expenses. She said if she had known, she never would have said what she did. I explained that the money itself wasn't the issue. I could afford to continue paying, just as I had been doing. The issue was being relegated to the role of financial provider while someone else received credit for being the caring parent. I told her that actions have consequences, and her Father's Day speech had consequences too. Update 1. The conversation with my daughter continued for another hour that morning. She was crying by the end, alternating between apologies and accusations. She said I was being petty and vindictive, punishing her for trying to make her stepfather feel valued. She asked how I could risk her entire future over hurt feelings. I remained calm throughout her emotional response. I told her I wasn't punishing her for making her stepfather feel valued. I was simply accepting her assessment that he was the better father and allowing him to prove it by handling the responsibilities that real fathers handle. She hung up on me eventually, but called back 2 hours later. This time, her mother was also on the line. My ex-wife was furious, demanding to know how I could do something so cruel and manipulative. She accused me of using money as a weapon and trying to sabotage our daughter's education out of spite. I listened to her rant for several minutes before responding. I told her that I had never used money as a weapon. I had quietly supported our daughter's education for 2 years without asking for recognition or credit. I had simply decided to stop providing financial support for someone who clearly didn't consider me her real father. My ex-wife demanded to know how much money was involved. When I told her about the monthly tuition payments, she fell silent. She hadn't known either. She asked why I had never mentioned it, and I told her I hadn't seen any reason to discuss it. I was handling an expense related to my daughter's well-being, just as I handled many others. She then asked if I was really going to let our daughter's education be destroyed over this. I told her I wasn't destroying anything. I was simply no longer funding it. If she and her husband wanted to maintain our daughter's enrollment, they were free to do so. The reality of the situation began to sink in during that call. My ex-wife and her husband didn't have an extra $2,400 per month available for tuition. They had been living under the assumption that it was being covered somehow, never questioning the arrangement because it had never been their problem to solve. My ex-wife tried a different approach then. She apologized for our daughter's thoughtless comment and asked if we could work something out. She suggested that maybe I could continue paying tuition while they made sure our daughter understood and appreciated my contribution. I told her that forced gratitude wasn't what I was looking for. If our daughter genuinely valued my role in her life, that would be reflected in how she treated me, not in scripted thank you speeches designed to secure continued funding. The call ended with my ex-wife saying she needed to discuss the situation with her husband and figure out their options. I told her I understood and that I hoped they could find a solution that worked for their family. Update 2. 3 days passed before I heard anything else. During that time, I continued my normal routine, but I found myself thinking constantly about the situation. I wasn't second-guessing my decision, but I was curious about how they would handle it. My daughter called me Thursday evening. Her tone was completely different this time. She was quiet, almost defeated. She told me she had spent the past few days trying to understand how the tuition had been getting paid and why nobody in her immediate family had known about my contributions. She said she had confronted her mother and stepfather about the situation. Neither of them had been aware of the monthly payments I was making. Her stepfather had assumed her mother was handling it through some combination of savings and financial aid. Her mother had assumed her stepfather was covering it as part of his commitment to the family. The revelation had created significant tension in their household. Her stepfather was uncomfortable with the idea that he had been receiving credit for my financial contributions. Her mother was embarrassed that she had been so disconnected from her daughter's educational expenses. My daughter told me she was beginning to understand the scope of what I had been doing quietly in the background. She said she had always assumed college expenses were just something that got handled automatically, like the mortgage or utilities. She had never considered who was actually writing the checks. She apologized again, but this time it felt different. She wasn't apologizing because she was in trouble and needed something. She was apologizing because she understood what her words had actually meant and how they had minimized my role in her life. I asked her what she planned to do about school. She told me she and her stepfather had spent hours researching financial aid options and loan programs. The reality was harsh. Even with maximum financial aid, they would need to come up with nearly $1,800 per month to keep her enrolled. Her stepfather had offered to take out a personal loan to cover the shortfall, but the monthly payments would strain their budget significantly. Her mother was considering going back to work full-time to help with expenses, even though she had been planning to stay home with their younger children. I listened to her explain their financial challenges without offering solutions. She wasn't asking me to fix the situation, just sharing what they were dealing with. I told her I appreciated her honesty about the reality they were facing. She asked me if there was any possibility of working out a different arrangement. She said she understood why I had stopped the payments and didn't expect me to just resume them as if nothing had happened. But she wondered if there was a way to rebuild our relationship while also addressing the practical problem of her education. I told her I would think about it. I wasn't ready to make any immediate decisions, but I was encouraged by the change in her approach to the conversation. Update 3. Over the weekend, I did a lot of thinking about what kind of relationship I wanted with my daughter moving forward. The Father's Day incident had been painful, but it had also been clarifying. I didn't want to be the invisible parent who was only valued for financial contributions, but I also didn't want to permanently damage my relationship with my daughter over a thoughtless comment. I decided to propose a different arrangement. Monday morning, I called my daughter and asked if she wanted to meet for coffee to discuss the situation. She agreed immediately, and we met that afternoon at a cafe near her campus. I told her I had been thinking about everything that had happened and had a proposal for her consideration. I was willing to resume paying her tuition, but with some conditions that would ensure our relationship was based on more than just financial obligation. First, I wanted monthly dinners with just the two of us. No phones, no distractions, just time to maintain our connection as father and daughter. Second, I wanted transparency about her academic progress and future plans. I had been funding her education without any insight into her studies or goals. Third, I wanted acknowledgement of my contributions when appropriate. I wasn't asking for constant gratitude, but I also wasn't willing to be the invisible supporter while someone else received credit for my sacrifices. She listened to my proposal carefully and agreed to all 3 conditions without hesitation. She said she had realized over the past week how disconnected we had become and how much she had taken my support for granted. I told her I would restart the tuition payments for the fall semester, but that this arrangement was dependent on both of us putting effort into rebuilding our relationship. If she reverted to treating me as just a financial resource, the payments would stop again. She asked if I was still hurt about the Father's Day situation. I told her I was disappointed, but that I understood she hadn't intended to be hurtful. The important thing was that we both learned something about the importance of acknowledging the people who support us. We had our first monthly dinner last week. She told me about her classes, her career aspirations, and her concerns about graduating into a competitive job market. It was the longest substantive conversation we had had in over a year. At the end of dinner, she thanked me for everything I had been doing to support her education. She said she had never realized how much thought and sacrifice went into providing for someone else's future. It wasn't a scripted thank you designed to secure continued funding. It was genuine recognition from someone who had learned to see beyond her immediate circumstances. The situation taught both of us valuable lessons about assumptions, communication, and the importance of recognizing the people who support us. My daughter learned that financial support doesn't appear magically and that the people providing it deserve acknowledgement and respect. I learned that sometimes you have to be willing to let people experience consequences before they can truly understand the value of what they've been taking for granted. Our relationship isn't completely repaired yet, but it's moving in a positive direction. The monthly dinners have become something we both look forward to, and she's more engaged in discussing her academic progress and future plans. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most painful moments. Father's Day will always remind me of feeling invisible and unappreciated, but it also became the catalyst for building a more honest and connected relationship with my daughter.